Just give us your initial thoughts about what next for France, because it looks like an incredibly difficult situation for Emmanuel Macron.
Yeah, I mean, I was speaking to someone recently about this, and when I was in Brussels the last, and they sort of joked, well, we all got to have a good laugh at you Brits during your period of political crisis and chaos, and now it's our turn. It's funny how these things sort of turn about. You can probably guess the nationality of the person I was speaking to. Look, this is a really difficult situation for France. I think we have precisely the kind of deadlock and high stakes politics, but you need a kind of a seasoned veteran negotiator like Michel Barnier to sort out. But of course, that isn't how it's panned out. It's hard to see a way out of this in the near term. Emmanuel Macron can't dissolve this polarized parliament until June next year. So there's no new elections until June next year. So he has to somehow appoint another prime minister, find a new government. But I mean, who's going to want this job? I mean, if you were to look up poison chalice in the dictionary or La Dictionnaire at this exact moment, I think you'd find basically a picture of, a picture of who, but would be no picture because there is no Prime Minister of France after Michel Barnier handed in his resignation. It's a job no one wants.
And no one can do. James, does it mean that the government can keep functioning, or do we get ourselves into an American style situation where the government actually closes down?
Well, there's a sort of a separation, So Macron retains responsibility for foreign policy and defence, despite the fact that he is kind of weakened. I mean, we talk about this visit coming up with Notre Dame, and Macron sort of styled himself as Jupiter, right? This guy up on high, handing down missives, taking a sort of a very executive, top-down leadership. But he's sort of gone from master of the universe to, at best, master of ceremonies. He is a sort of a lame duck. There will be uncertainty, and that matters. I mean, the reason why Barnier faced this vote of no confidence is because he wants to bring in these reforms, social security reforms, which are necessary, which are needed if France is to adhere to EU fiscal rules and reduce its massive public deficit. And Barnier himself, he said, "Look, I'm summarizing here, but he said, look, you can get rid of me, but this problem won't go away when I do. Another government is going to have to deal with it." So you have a situation of this chaos, this uncertainty in a major and highly influential EU country at a point when, there are some quite significant geopolitical challenges in the offing.
Absolutely, as you say. So you've got the two most important members of the European Union, France and Germany, both in really states of political crisis. What does it mean more broadly for the European Union when you have the two foundational countries of the European Union in this type of situation?
Well, look, it's difficult. It's difficult to overstate how important Paris and Berlin are in times of crisis. The EU was basically founded to stop these two countries killing each other and plunging the continent into war. Right? There is a moral reason why France and Germany are important. Germany remains the EU's largest economy, despite it showing some signs of slowdown. Yeah, when you're looking at a situation now as the EU is, you have Trump coming in. Trump may well cut aid to Ukraine. The EU is politically committed to continuing to support Ukraine for, and the line they say, as long as it takes. Okay, now that means that there will be a Washington sized hole in finance potentially to Ukraine. Now, the EU is quite good at conjuring up money, finding money. It could borrow money against the EU's budget, which is a taboo it broke for the first time during the coronavirus pandemic. But, those still lead to difficult discussions and difficult intergovernmental discussions. The fact is, EU's got 27 member states. It's quite rare for them all to agree on one thing at once, especially when you're talking about stuff which gets to breaking some of the barriers of national sovereignty, like coming up with a common defense policy, ramping up a European defense industry to try and replace the American weapons, which will eventually sort of drop off the map, or even coming up with joint procurement rules so you can buy US weapons to either send directly to Ukraine or to replace your old weapon stock, which you're sending to Ukraine. I mean, none of this is easy. And when things get difficult, what you do need is the engine, the Paris Berlin engine of EU policymaking to be working. And at the moment, it's broken down.
What does it mean for Keir Starmer's relationship with the EU and the UK's relationship with the EU? Rachel Reeves next week. Actually, no, I better not say that. I'm not supposed to know that. Sorry. What does it mean, sorry, hold on. What does it mean, James, for Keir Starmer's relationship with the European Union? He obviously he's made the point that he wants closer relationship with the European Union, but who's he supposed to call? And doesn't it make the UK's relationship with the EU trickier? And we know that Keir Starmer is instinctively a Europhile, but this is dangerous territory now for the UK because who they connect with, apart from, frankly, Giorgia Meloni is one of the more stable leaders now, the Italian Prime Minister, one of the more stable leaders in the European Union. Doesn't that cause real problems for Starmer?
Well, I mean, actually, I'd say it's quite an opportunity for Keir Starmer. What you have is a situation where, okay, so let's take Germany, for example. Starmer's done a pretty good job with Germany. He's old mates with Olaf Scholz. They're from the same sort of centre-left background. They know each other and have known each other for many years. So, okay, Germany's government collapsing and Olaf Scholz probably getting shown the exit door in February isn't necessarily great news. I mean, Starmer, though, has very successfully actually sort of made inroads with Macron. If you remember, he was invited to the D-Day celebrations that Rishi Sunak decided to leave early to do an interview with ITV. So, I think the truth of the matter is that actually you're more likely to get a more positive reaction from EU capitals, individual EU capitals, than you would from the European Commission in Brussels, where you have people who are veterans of these very difficult Brexit negotiations, some of whom are still locked in the postures and red lines of the initial divorce, right? But people need to sort of come out of their trenches, if you like, and think about new ways of doing things. And Starmer, right, one of the things he's asked for is a UK-EU security deal. Well, when Washington's support for European security is in question, where France is sort of looking a bit rudderless, maybe it's not a bad time for Britain to try and reclaim a kind of historical role in providing European security. And not as a sort of a quasi-member of the EU, you sort of do it more through NATO, but it's more sending out a signal, we care about European security, we're not just all about ourselves. Yes, we are a major military power and we are standing with you against Russian aggression. Now, that provides a kind of a positive, a warmer sort of mood music. The Germans, I think, would be grateful. The French might be a little bit put out, but broadly fine. The Baltics would love it. The Poles would love it. And then you start to build up a bit of momentum, the kind of momentum which, if you're good at negotiating and if you understand how the EU works, which is two things which successive British governments have shown they are absolutely useless at up until sort of recently. But if, sort of magically people remember the lessons of 47 years of EU membership, which seem to have been completely forgotten in the immediate aftermath of 2016, you can then sort of try and parley that into, well, we've done this deal on security. Maybe we could widen it out to something to do with some action on illegal migration. And yeah, okay, as we're sort of doing that, maybe there are some ways we can come to some sort of arrangement on mutual recognition of chemicals. These things can sort of begin to unfurl also, we need to rebuild trust if we're going to want this closer relationship. What do we have to offer? Well, we're quite good on security and we're quite hawkish on Ukraine at a point when Olaf Scholz is basically running for election as a kind of peace chancellor. And, Emmanuel Macron is looking less and less relevant. So, if Starmer wants to be brave, and I mean, one of the things that, Boris Johnson did do right in Europe was take this leadership role on Ukraine. And, despite the fact that he was involved in the Brexit campaign very sort of prominently and delivered the Brexit deal, it wasn't like the Europeans turned their nose up at that. Obviously, after he stopped being prime minister, we kind of sacrificed or lost that leadership role to Germany, which still is, I think, one of the biggest aid and weapons supplies in Europe. I think the biggest. But I mean, that's looking like with their budget problems, that looks like that's going to drop off. So that could be an opportunity for Britain.
I don't want to demand too much of a hostage to fortune from you, but do you see any circumstances? We're waiting for Macron to address the nation in the next few hours. Do you foresee, James, any situation where Macron himself would resign?
Well, I have a long and proud track record of incorrectly predicting loads of things. So, I mean, my hunch is he's not going to resign. I mean, it's very rare for a French president to resign. He has got a term which lasts into 2027. At the end of that term, he can't be president again. He can't run for election again. So if he was to step down, who's his successor? Who is someone who can replace Emmanuel Macron, a man who walked out of the Socialist Party, set up his own party, built it around him, then won a second term? It's very rare for a French president to win a second term. I mean, Emmanuel Macron obviously is a very clever man, but he thinks he's clever and he's very bad at showing how clever he thinks he is. I mean, everyone, he comes across quite poorly. And he's made a couple of, I would say, massive miscalculations recently, calling the snap election in the first place. But, I can't see him resigning. I mean, if he resigns, he gives Marine Le Pen what she wants, which is another run of a presidency with no real rival. The success of Macron hollowed out the centre parties on the left and on the right? So, the Socialist Party is not even strong enough, really, to sort of stand on its own 2 feet. You have the hard left, you have the hard right. The Conservatives party, the Republican, Michel Barnier's party, is a tiny shell of the party that gave us de Gaulle, that gave us Sarkozy, that gave us these previous presidents, these big, heavyweights. There's no one there, right? The 2 big names now, if there was an election tomorrow, it's Macron, who can't stand, and Le Pen. And Macron views Le Pen as an existential crisis to France. Macron sees the EU as a way of amplifying and preserving French influence on the world stage. Marine Le Pen doesn't see it that way.